Buckle up, grab your overpriced electrolyte water, and ignore the fact that it's 2 a.m. We are talking about the ultimate boy king, the original influencer, and the man whose posthumous PR team is doing more work than the entire Kardashian empire combined, Tutankhamun. Here is the hype map for our deep dive into the desert's most famous whoopsie. Okay, look, if I asked you to name a pharaoh, 99% of you are going to scream King Tut at your screen. And I get it. The gold mask, iconic. The tomb, stacked. The vibe, immaculate. But here's the tea. In the grand timeline of Egypt, Tutankhamun was kind of a footnote. He wasn't a conqueror like Thutmose III. He wasn't a builder like Ramses the Great. He was a teenager with a bad foot who ruled for about 10 minutes and then died before he could even legally rent a chariot. So why is he the main character of history? Because he was the only one who didn't get his house robbed. Every other great pharaoh's tomb was cleaned out by grave robbers faster than a PS5 drop on launch day. Tutankhamun stayed hidden because everyone, and I mean everyone, forgot he existed. We're talking about a story that involves a religious cult, a genetic disaster, a literal heretic father, and a 3,000-year-long game of hide-and-seek. Welcome to the life, death, and accidental fame of the Boy King. To understand Tut, we have to talk about his dad, Akhenaten. And boy, do we need to talk about Akhenaten. Imagine you live in a world where there are hundreds of gods. You've got a god for the sun, a god for the Nile, a god for cats, probably a god for that feeling when you get sand in your sandals. It's a vibe. It's worked for thousands of years. Then comes Akhenaten. One day he wakes up, has a literal god complex, and tells the entire nation, hey guys, new rule. All those gods, fake, deleted, canceled. From now on, we only worship the Aten, which is literally just the sun disk. Also, I'm the only one who can talk to it. So, yeah, Venmo me your prayers. Wait, he just canceled 2,000 years of religion? Oh, he went full scorched earth. He changed his name, fired all the priests, who were, by the way, the most powerful people in the country, bold move, Steve, and then, because he's a total drama queen, he decided he hated the capital city, Thebes. Thebes is so mainstream, Akhenaten probably said while wearing linen that cost more than a small village. We're moving. Everyone pack your bags. We're going into the middle of the desert where there's no water, no shade, and lots of scorpions. We'll call it Amarna. It'll be indie. This guy was the main character of the 14th century BCE, but in the everyone in the comments section hates him kind of way. He changed the art style too. Suddenly, pharaohs didn't look like buff Greek gods. They had long faces, big bellies, and wide hips because Akhenaten wanted realism. In the middle of this chaos, a little boy named Tutankhaten is born. Imagine being Tut. Your dad is destroying the economy, the neighbors, the Hittites are starting to look at Egypt like a free buffet, and your family tree is less of a tree and more of a braid. Seriously, your mom and dad were likely siblings. We'll get to that medical nightmare later. Akhenaten was so busy staring at the sun that he didn't notice the country was falling apart. When he finally kicked the bucket, he left behind a confused 9-year-old, a bankrupt treasury, and a population of people who really wanted their old gods back. Tutankhamun didn't just inherit a throne. He inherited a dumpster fire. The pressure is on. Imagine being 9 years old. Most of us were worried about Pokemon cards or not eating broccoli. Tutankhamun was worried about a collapsing empire and a country that hated his dad's guts. The era of the puppet king, the genetic lottery from hell, and the world's most stressful teenage internship. So Akhenaten is dead. The Sun King has set, and the vibe in Egypt is basically the morning after a Project X house party. Everything is broken, the neighbors are complaining, and there's a massive cleaning bill. Enter Tutankhaten. He's 9. He's probably just mastered tying his own sandals, and suddenly a group of very serious men in linen skirts bow down and say, "Congrats, kid. You're a living god." Also, the Hittites are at the border and the economy is a literal crater. What's the plan? Tut's plan? Survival. But first, we need a rebrand. You can't be Tutankhaten, living image of the sun disk, when everyone wants to go back to the old school god, Amun. It would be like trying to sell new Coke when everyone is rioting for classic. So the PR team steps in. Old name, Tutankhaten. New name, Tutankhamun. The message, my dad was a weirdo. The old gods are back and drinks are on the house. Just kidding, we're broke. He abandons his father's indie desert city of Amarna, which probably smelled like regret and sunstroke, and moves the court back to Thebes. He starts pouring what little money they have into fixing the temples his dad vandalized. It was the ultimate I'm sorry tour. He wasn't just a king, he was a 9-year-old apology letter written in hieroglyphics. Let's be real, Tut wasn't calling the shots. If you're 9, you aren't negotiating trade deals with Mesopotamia. You're asking if you can have extra honey on your bread. Behind the throne were two guys who were the definition of main character energy, but in a House of Cards kind of way. I and Horemheb. I was the Grand Vizier. Think of him as the ultimate career politician. He'd been around since Tut's grandfather. He knew where all the bodies were buried, mostly because he probably helped bury them. He was the uncle who was super helpful but also definitely eyeing your inheritance. Horemheb was the general. He was the muscle. While I was doing the paperwork, Horemheb was at the borders trying to convince the neighbors that Egypt wasn't actually falling apart. Okay, the kid is cute. He looks great in gold. He's currently playing with a wooden lion in the dirt, so I've got about 10 years to advise him into doing exactly what I want. If he dies, oh well, I've got a backup plan. It involves me wearing that crown. I look great in blue. These two were the deep state of ancient Egypt. They guided Tut's hand as he signed decrees to bring back the old priesthoods. They were the ones who realized that if they didn't make Tut look like a hero, they'd all be out of a job, or worse, fed to the crocodiles. Now, we have to talk about the human side. And by human, I mean the absolute genetic disaster that was the 18th dynasty. In ancient Egypt, the royals thought they were gods. And who do gods marry? Other gods. Or in this case, their sisters, cousins, and aunts. They wanted to keep the bloodline pure. But all they ended up doing was making a bloodline that was basically a circle. When scientists did a virtual autopsy on Tut's mummy using CT scans, they found that our boy was struggling. The club foot. He had a necrosis of the bone in his left foot. He wasn't sprinting through the desert chasing lions, he was hobbling. The canes. When they opened his tomb, they found over 130 walking sticks. For a long time, historians thought, oh, they're just symbols of power. No, he actually needed them. He was the first pharaoh to require a handicapped parking spot for his chariot. Malaria. He had multiple strains of malaria in his system. His immune system was basically a gone fishing sign. The cleft palate, just another gift from the family tree. So, he was a sickly, limping teenager in a world where the average lifespan was already 30. That sounds miserable. It was, but he still had to show up to festivals and look like a god. Tut married his half-sister, Ankhesenamun. Again, the family tree is a wreath. They tried to have kids. They actually found 2 mummified fetuses in his tomb, but due to the genetic yikes of it all, they didn't survive. Then, at age 19, the boy king suddenly stopped. He didn't die in a glorious battle. He didn't die of old age. He likely died from a combination of a broken leg that got infected and a massive bout of malaria. He was a teenager who tripped. And because medicine in 1323 BCE was basically rub some honey on it and pray to a cat, he was done for. His death was so sudden that the entire country went into a, wait, what do we do now? Panic. And that, my friends, is where the story gets really weird. The king is dead, the palace is in a panic, and the embalmers are looking at their watches like, guys, we have 70 days to turn this teenager into a god, and we don't even have a hole in the ground yet. The most rushed DIY funeral in history, the long nap, and the man in the dusty hat who finally found the doorbell. When a pharaoh dies, you usually have years, decades even, to carve out a mountain and fill it with gold. But Tut died at 19. He was the historical equivalent of a guest who shows up to a dinner party 4 hours early while you're still in your bathrobe. The problem? His actual grand tomb wasn't finished. Not even close. So A, remember him? The crafty vizier? Makes a classic executive decision. Look, A probably said, eyeing a much smaller, modest tomb nearby that was actually being built for himself. The kid needs a place to stay. Let's just swap. He takes my studio apartment. I'll take his penthouse when it's done in 20 years. Everyone wins. Mostly me. Because they were in such a rush, they literally shoved $3 billion worth of gold into a space the size of a 2-car garage. It was like trying to fit the entire inventory of a luxury jewelry store into a walk-in closet. They didn't have time to make new furniture, so they grabbed old stuff from the basement. They painted the walls so fast that dark brown spots, ancient mold, formed because they sealed the tomb while the plaster was still wet. They even messed up the coffin. The middle coffin didn't fit into the outer one, so they literally sawed off the toes of the wooden sarcophagus to make it close. The moral: even if you're a living god, if you die on a Friday afternoon, you're getting the express package. Once the stone was rolled over the door, Tutankhamun did something incredible. He vanished. Usually, grave robbers are like heat-seeking missiles. They find tombs within weeks, and someone did try to break into Tut's tomb twice, shortly after he was buried. But the guards caught them, resealed the door, and then, in a stroke of pure accidental genius, Nature took over. A few decades later, another pharaoh, Ramses VI, built his massive tomb right above Tut's. The workers threw all their limestone chips and dirt down the hill, completely burying the entrance to Tut's studio apartment under tons of rubble. Tut was officially unsubscribed from history. While the world was busy inventing the Renaissance, the steam engine, and TikTok, Tut was sitting in total darkness, surrounded by his gold chariots and a jar of 3,000-year-old honey, which, fun fact, is technically still edible, though I wouldn't recommend it. He became a ghost. Historians eventually saw his name on a few lists and thought, Tutankhamun? Must have been a typo. Fast forward to 1922, meet Howard Carter. He's a British archaeologist with a very stiff upper lip and a very empty wallet. He's been digging in the Valley of the Kings for years, and he's found exactly nothing. His benefactor, Lord Carnarvon, is a wealthy guy who loves fast cars and old dust. He calls Carter and says, "Look, Howard, I've spent a fortune. This is the last season. If you don't find something by Christmas, we're going home and I'm taking up stamp collecting." The tension. It's November. Carter's down to his last patch of dirt. On November 4th, a water boy, a literal child whose job was to bring jars of water to the diggers, starts digging a hole to prop up his water jar. He hits something hard. It's a stone step. Please be a tomb. Please don't be a very expensive rock. They dig. 1 step, 2 steps, 12 steps. They reach a door with the seal of the royal necropolis. Carter drills a tiny hole, pokes a candle through, and Lord Carnarvon leans in, shaking. Can you see anything? Yes. Wonderful things. Inside, it wasn't just things. It was chaos. Golden beds piled on top of each other, chariots disassembled like IKEA furniture, and a silence that had been held for 3,245 years. Carter didn't just find a tomb. He found a time capsule that shouldn't have existed. So the tomb is open. Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon are the most famous men on Earth. They're basically the 1920s version of rock stars, but with more tweed. But then things get spooky. 6 months after the tomb opened, Lord Carnarvon died. The cause? A mosquito bite. Seriously. He nicked a mosquito bite while shaving, it got infected, and he checked out. At the exact moment he died in Cairo, the lights in the city supposedly went out, and back in England, his dog, Susie, supposedly howled and dropped dead. It's a curse. The boy king is angry. Or, it's 1923 and antibiotics don't exist yet. Also, maybe don't shave over an open wound in a dusty desert. But the public loved it. Every time someone who had even walked past the tomb got a cold, the newspapers screamed, "Curse!" A cobra ate Howard Carter's canary? Curse. A financier got a fever? Curse. You lost your car keys? Tutankhamun did it. In reality, most people involved lived long, healthy lives. Howard Carter, the guy who actually touched the mummy, lived another 17 years. If there was a curse, Tut was really bad at targeting the main culprit. But here's the genius part. The curse made Tutankhamun a global brand. Suddenly, everything was Tut-themed. We had Tutankhamun soap, Tutankhamun jazz songs, and Tutankhamun fashion. He became the first ancient king to have a merchandising deal. So what have we learned from the life and times of the most famous teenager in history? Inbreeding is a bad architectural choice for a family tree. If your family tree is a circle, your health bar is going to be permanently in the red. Being a heretic is a great way to get your name deleted. Tut spent his whole life apologizing for his dad's sun disk obsession just to be forgotten anyway. The best way to be immortalized is to be a total failure in your own time. Think about it. Ramses the Great built giant statues of himself so everyone would remember him. Result? His tomb was robbed within years. Tutankhamun was so irrelevant and his death was such a rushed disaster that the world literally buried him under a pile of trash and forgot he existed. The moral: if you want to be remembered for 3,000 years, don't be a hero. Just be the guy who gets buried under the new arrivals section so no one finds you until the 20th century. Tutankhamun wasn't a great warrior. He wasn't a philosopher king. He was a kid who liked his walking sticks, loved his wife, and just wanted to bring back the gods everyone missed. He died in obscurity, but in the ultimate cosmic joke, he became the face of an entire civilization. He's not a king because of what he did. He's a king because he's the only one who actually showed up to the 20th century with all his stuff still in the original packaging. And that, my friends, is how you win history. By doing absolutely nothing for 3 millennia.